Welcome and thanks for joining us. We're excited for week 7 of our 2020 Why We Ride webinar series. My name is Devin Wilson and I am former Bike and Build CUS 2019, very exciting. And I'm currently serving as an AmeriCorps Vista member in St. John, Kansas, working for Stafford Economic Development. So Carolyn Dunn, who is going to be our prize speaker today, is going to be our boss. I am very excited to talk to everybody, and I'm super honored to be part of this next chapter of Bike and Build. So if anybody here is not familiar with Bike and Build, you can usually find us each summer as we bike across the country and run regional cycling trips for young adults that benefit from affordable housing and empowering young adults to become more civically engaged. While we unfortunately can't be running our trips this summer due to the pandemic, we're excited to continue our mission through a few different programs this summer, including this particular speaking series. Our chosen cause is a complex one. Affordable housing is about more than just home. It's an issue deeply intertwined with education, racial inequity, public health, government lending, transportation, fair wages, zoning laws, and so much more. Through the series, we hope to dive into the nuances of the cause, hearing from a diverse range of speakers, all working towards a common goal of having fair and decent housing for everyone. This week, we're very excited to hear from Carolyn Dunn about affordable housing and what it means and looks like in the context of rural America. So a brief introduction to Carolyn. Carolyn is the Executive Director of Stafford Economic Development. She is a 4-time build partner with Bike and Build. EcoDevo also works to promote economic and population growth throughout Stafford County by assisting their local businesses, engaging in local community activities, and promoting Stafford County as a great place to live, work, and play. So she has a 30-minute presentation prepared, and we encourage you to use the Q&A box here throughout the talk as well as the end of the presentation. And I'd like to now hand it over to Carolyn. So Carolyn, take it away.
Well, thank you. I am also very excited to have this opportunity to interact with the Bike and Build community. I first had my first interaction with Bike and Build was in 2014, and it was just a chance that a person I knew saw a news article and that the Bike and Build organization was coming through our part of the state, and they were very gracious to let me meet up with them and tell them about housing that year in 2014, and it's kind of led to this partnership that I'm very thankful for. I really just love the culture of bicycling. I had my own, I guess, similar cross, long distance bike ride in 2002 when I did Bike Across Kansas. So while I can't claim to know what it feels like to ride across the country, I at least can say I've done some long days on a bike and in some adverse conditions, and really just love the culture of this organization. So thank you for the chance to talk with you all today. So I am from Stafford County, Kansas, as we covered. I think that maybe it's probably appropriate to explain where Stafford County, Kansas is, because we are a pretty small place that not many people have occasion to visit. We're in central part of the state, a small county of 4,200 people. So even by Midwest or Kansas standards, we're pretty rural. In fact, with less than 5 people per square mile in population density, by some standards, we're frontier. So we live where Devin and I are now living and working is in a town of 1,200 people. It's St. John, the county seat, if you look at the map there. So that gives you a little bit of context as to where we are. A lot of what I do deals with the idea of population decline. Population decline threatens the rural community's ability to maintain basic services. At the top of that list are often the schools, hospitals, and grocery stores, honestly, are a very good barometer in many cases as to whether or not a community is sustainable. So in fact, a lot of what fueled my interest in being in economic development was my own experience on the school board. I would maintain that that population decline is a reflection of an investment gap. Whether we look at private investment, government investment or spending, and philanthropic sources, I think that that's a lot of what fuels what boils down to a lack of diversification in our economy. We have failed to enter into the different types of the economy that are growing. So I guess maybe another way of looking at that, sometimes I think that people say, well, agriculture has consolidated. That's a big part of our economy here. And that's the reason. Well, I would maintain that almost every other industry under the sun has consolidated in the last 2 generations. It's more the issue to me that we have failed to make our economy active in, I don't know, name what is growing, technology or whatever else. And that's kind of what we're struggling with. So Stafford County Economic Development was formed in 2011 to take a more, just proactive approach. We really hadn't had an entity that was specifically dedicated to addressing these issues. And we do, as Eric said, housing is very integrated into a number of issues. And I would say, economic development, especially rural economic development, is the same way. We engage in some traditional economic development activities, but we're equally involved in a range of community development activities. And housing is very much at the top of that list. Sometimes say it's hard work, but it's feasible. We are fighting population trends that have been declining for 70 years. But I would also say that in a county like ours, that's 40 people a year, rough. It's not even really that much. It might be more like 20 people a year. And with that, we get the right clicks with some business development, and that's 4 or 5 families. We can do that if we really put our minds to it. So I would say that as we're working on that, the lack of modern and affordable housing is both a symptom and a contributing factor to young adults choosing to live elsewhere. So investment in housing doesn't occur as much as we would like when people aren't moving here, when there isn't, businesses developing that recruit employees and drive some population growth. But I'd also say that young adults might not choose to live here if all they see are options for housing that involve a major renovation with uncertain, costs associated with it, or, just the type of housing that doesn't feel as appealing as to options they might have if they move to a more urban place. So it's a double-edged sword that I think we're dealing with. So I guess to kind of paint that picture a little more clearly, the average age of house in Stafford County is almost 90 years old at this point, and only 3% of the residential inventory has been built in the last 20 years. They're in an increasingly poor condition, less than, 80% of them rank in less than good condition by the county appraiser. And we also have a lower percentage of housing that's available as rental housing. So I find that people who move here are sometimes, quote unquote, forced to buy a house because they don't find rental options even available. That's another deterrent to choosing to locate here. I could tell you anecdotes all day long from the professional couple that included an engineer and a veterinarian that when they chose to move back here, ended up moving in with her bachelor brother for a period of time before they could find a house. We had a high school principal for a while that lived in the assisted living units of the local nursing home for a period of time because he couldn't find a simple place to rent. He didn't want to, he just wanted an apartment, so he ends up living at the nursing home. Anyway, I think this is highlighted for good reason. I think ultimately the crux of the problem is we need more housing, but new construction costs exceed affordability in this area. And I'll show you some examples of that. later on, but even for those who, there's multiple layers to this, but even for those who can afford a more expensive house or might want to build a house, some of the issues that become a barrier are financing related, because there aren't good comparables for a lender to use to establish the market value of the house being financed. When the average the average value of house here is $76,000, it becomes difficult to establish a good market comp for a house that might cost over $200,000 to build. So some of the barriers.
Carolyn, before we go on to the next slide, I wanted to acknowledge we have some questions. So this is something I wasn't really sure about when I first started with Stafford Economic Development. So what is the difference between Stafford Economic Development and is it a committee or council? And how does that differ from a traditional chamber of commerce?
We are set up as a 501c3. So we are not, I think a lot of economic development agencies are a department within either a city or a county government. Ours is not. Ours is independent. We have a board of directors, just like many other nonprofits do, and we act independently. We do receive an allocation of funding from our county each year that's kind of our base of funding, but we would not be able to do nearly what we have taken on by a long shot without having competed for grants to carry out different projects. Chambers of commerce, in my experience, are more kind of the business club in a sense. You know, they are membership driven, and they may do more in terms of advocacy or promotion related to the business community. We kind of fill that role in some cases here because we don't have an active chamber of commerce in the county, but I put the primary emphasis of our work in the things that relate to, I often say, when we're either growing the population or growing the tax base. Those are fundamental measures of whether we're getting the job done we intend to do.
Okay, awesome.
So, good question.
So could you tell us more about these two houses that we're now seeing?
So I thought I'd show you kind of an example of when I say, you know, we've got an aging inventory in, you know, aging condition. Here's a couple of examples. The house on the bottom was recently sold. This one sold to an individual that does plan to fix it up. The one that's got the three women standing in front, that was actually a house that our Bike and Build VAPs helped with just the first week they were here. It was a house that's been acquired by a land bank in Stafford. I could probably kind of go into what a land bank is, but we'll save that maybe for a little bit. But anyway, what would you guess? I might throw out a guess. The house that the women are standing in front of was recently purchased by the land bank. And what do you think the value of that house is? I'll wait for some, I'll let you guys throw some guesses in, but in the meantime, I may move on just to make sure we keep on track. Knowing that we want some additional new housing, we have engaged in several different attempts here to build housing. Our first one was we received 2 different grants to build the house that's here. It's a duplex. It cost $310,000 to build in 2014. Some of its features, each side has 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a full basement. You know, it's got a lot of the features that we have always heard that families are seeking. It's energy efficient, and we have been using this approach to using infill lots, the places where street infrastructure already exists, water and sewer infrastructure already exists. A house probably was there at some point that's been torn down, but we were able to build into those lots. So in some ways it's been practical, but I think it's what we've learned from it. You know, I think it's a house that's very, I think, appealing. We have our original owner, our original renters in one side that have stayed there, well, for what, 6 or 6.5 years now. The other side has only had 2 tenants. But I think we can't keep doing that because what the cost was too expensive for what we can charge in rent, and we aren't going to get $300,000 grants every year to build one house. So, you know, it had some good features about it. We had young adults. This was a high school student that started his own construction business immediately following high school. And we made a lot of attempts to include the community in it. We kind of talked about community development, but in the end, we've decided that hasn't been a bad experience, but we're not really kind of hitting the nail on the head the way we need to either. So this is another house that, in fact, Back and Build has been a part of, and we bought this house for a very similar price to the one that I asked you about in Stafford. So any guesses as to what the values of these two houses are? No? Okay.
We had a couple guesses in the chat. So
yeah, so I think the Eric guessed.
I'm not seeing the chat. Sorry.
All right, so I'll interpret real quick. So Eric had proposed 20,000 as a price. We also had 10,000. Somebody asked about the lot size and guessed 43. We had somebody 40. When I first saw the house, I guess somewhere around 25. So what did you actually pay for?
Okay.
This house
so this house in Hudson, they're very similar prices, even though the houses are not necessarily that exactly comparable. This is a house of about 1,000 square feet, maybe a little less, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. We bought it for 10,000. And the house in Stafford is a big house, and that's probably actually part of what makes it intimidating, or, you know, in a way reduces its value, is because to improve it is going to be so expensive. But it was a $12,000 purchase, and I think ballpark wise, its size is probably more like 2,800 square feet of living space. So very different houses, but again, and that valuation is kind of part of what works against us, actually. When we bought this house in Hudson, it was twofold purpose. Part of it was to you know, have a house that we could improve and create a, you know, good affordable housing option. But the other side of it is a $10,000 house can also be something that becomes a problem if someone who either doesn't have the means or the desire to make improvements, or someone that's looking for a cheap place to do, honestly, drug activity. We don't want that, really. It's affordable housing is one thing, but that's kind of something that is actually not very helpful. So we acquired that house, and here's some of the before pictures. The heater in the middle of the room is certainly a hark to an earlier era. This is in 2016, I believe. Bike and Build, no, 15. This was 2015. And so we had a Bike and Build group here that helped do the demo work for that. And a little more of the before, during, and after. I wish that a house like that had been available when I first moved here, because the place I moved into was probably a lot more like the before, and I cried a lot. So anyway, I think that it's been a good thing. We hoped to spend $25,000 improving it. It ended up being more than that. I think we have in the end about $50,000 in it, which becomes, again, that economical issue of a house, even improved, does not have a market value of $50,000 in this environment. Maybe $35,000 is a pretty good guess. So in terms of trying to sell that, it's a challenge to be able to sustain that program without continued funding that subsidizes that. Or if you try to sell it at market price, even a $50,000 house, which I could make the case is quite affordable. You know, I think a 15-year note, if you finance the entire thing with no down payment, equates to a monthly payment that's around $350. So on one hand, it could be defined as affordable, but on the other hand, and people probably don't see that as a wise investment to spend $50,000 on a house that might have a market value more like 35. So again, we have found that we're not really finding the, I don't know, the magic solution here. A few more pictures of the after. But I think it was a lot of improvement. We really did a lot to it, and yet it's not for everyone. Here's a third attempt in our context. We built a house in cooperation with a affordable funding agency that covers a large region. And this is a type of house that they have been building in other areas, really not all that urban. I mean, like a town that this house has been built in is a population of probably 15,000, but kind of more of a regional economic. It's a town where people go to do more shopping and things like that. It's a little more, has more economic activity regionally. What do you suppose this house costs to build? This was actually, this model of house has been built in other parts of the state as well, under the auspices of a moderate income housing program. And I think you'd find this kind of thing outside of even a housing program. I mean, just developers are building houses a lot like this in more urban areas. So do we have guesses? I don't know. Okay, I'll keep moving then if we don't.
So we have some guesses. So Eric said, I think 280. We also had some other people offer out 45, 85, I guessed around 120. And then a few people said 45.
Wait, 145?
No, 280. We had a few different people guess 45,000, 85,000, and 120,000.
Okay, so I guess maybe I should have clarified that that was a new build. That was not a remodel. That was a new build. And it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on a basement foundation. The basement's unfinished, has a small 2-car garage. I think the living space is around 1,200 square feet. So that one that I guess I should, when we built that in 2016, that cost $160,000 to build, roughly $163,000. The same house the year later, if I'm doing my years right, Hurricane Harvey in Houston made an impact on building supplies. And this was the next house we built, very similar specifications. They did choose, the owners chose to upgrade some elements of it, but it was $190,000 roughly. So the first house, second house, this house, almost identical, almost same timing. They didn't put a foundation, a basement under it. It's a slab foundation, and that one was about $170,000. So these last 2 houses, we participated in a program that basically gave a down payment subsidy to those who chose to themselves finance the construction of the houses. So they got a $25,000 cash subsidy to build these houses, but it still is a house that's $145,000 to $170,000 roughly to finance, and that is still, we have experienced, I guess, too far outside of either the affordability, or I think there's also an element of, if people are wanting to build a house and take that leap of committing to it, they're planning to be here for a long time, and they don't want a starter house. They want the house that they're planning to live in forevermore, and that house is probably to build, not the kind of starter end of things. It's probably 200, it's probably a $300,000 house when it's all said and done. So this program didn't exactly hit all the buttons that we wanted to either. Oh, this is the same I guess I got that in there twice. Just kind of talking a little bit about, we've done a number of community development kind of things. The big one for us has been, we had a grocery store, even as we're like trying to do so much to address the fundamentals of rural development here. We know that a grocery store is something you got to hold on to. Ours announced it wanted to close in 2016. It was one of the smallest maybe stores of the Dillon system, which is a part of the Kroger system. And so there was a real scramble. In a way, it might have been a blessing in disguise, because it really was the kind of project where people coalesced well around the idea that they wanted to come up with a way to still have a grocery store here. And long story short, it led to building a new store, not going back into that existing building, but actually after a lot of study, it was determined that to really be successful in the long run, you needed to have a bigger presence and try to get more shoppers in the door. So we built a new store, kind of also in the same way of some of our remodel projects. It has a dual benefit to it. It's not only that it created new development, but it also addressed some blight that was right along our highway. So we tore down an old auto repair store, which had actually been a restaurant. It was actually built as a restaurant, and tore it down and have a brand new store. We're now looking at doing some industrial development. This is very much in the planning and dreaming stage, but this would be some of the more traditional economic development type work. This project, I'm actually sitting in the building pictured in this brochure. We have developed a business incubator, shared workspace. It's a program. Within it, we host a program trying to help people find remote work opportunities. So instead of trying to recruit a manufacturing business here or whatever, trying to help match people, even before everyone was doing remote work the way that we have been the last 4 or 5 months, we were trying to help people find the opportunities to do remote work, because there is a lot of that available. So the second floor is an apartment where we are able to host interns, which I'll get to a little more too. Bike and Build helped us with this. This is our new layout. But Bike and Build in 2019 helped do some of the painting and particularly the painting and laying of carpet in this carpet squares in this space. So if you're able to see a little bit of that beautiful blue wall behind me, that is all Bike and Build work. That was part of that crew that year. And that's what's behind me right now. We have a program that we've been participating in for almost 2 years with AmeriCorps. This is how we have been matched with Devin. He came through with Bike and Build last year. We met him, and he's graciously decided to come back and through the AmeriCorps, and is working specifically with the Gray Studio project, which I'll tell you a little bit about. But has I guess seen both elements of I don't know how we're bringing people in. So the AmeriCorps element kind of has an interesting kind of I don't know, tangential way that we have led into our most recent housing project. I was actually on our K-State campus a couple years ago trying to recruit for our AmeriCorps positions, and ended up being connected with a professor there who is in the College of Architecture and working with a design build studio where they're focused on affordable and energy efficient housing. And they had done a project in Kansas City, but might be interested in doing something very different. We've invited them to work with us. And long story short, for the 2019 and 2020 academic year, we had a 5th-year studio program in their College of Architecture that studied specifically our town, the demographics of it, and designed a house that they thought would fit here. So this is one of the slides from that professor's kind of pitch to me, I guess, in terms of kind of what they could offer. They have spent a lot of time going to various affordable housing. I say they, it wasn't that specific class, but he with previous classes has gone to places like Texas and Arkansas and Alabama, I think, were some of them that he highlighted, studying what they have done with affordable housing in different contexts. And this was one that he really kind of hit on with me. And I know it kind of, in a way, criticizes Habitat for Humanity. I think we all want to make sure that we are not coming off as criticizing that group. They do a lot of great things, but this was a particular house that he was able to give an example of, that while, you know, there was a remodel of this house, it offered some good benefits, but they could also measure that it lacked in the element of it of energy efficiency. And so while it might have been more affordable to get into, there was seen to be room for improvement in what the ongoing costs were to live in it. So these infrared pictures are illustrating the heat loss, or, you know, within the building. So he was making the case that if we are really going to address the affordable housing issue well, we also have to address what it costs to live in that house once people are in there, and we've got to look at energy efficiency as a key piece of that. So this is a few of the slide decks slides from the presentation they used to kind of sum up their participation in this. They submitted this, or this was a part of a solar decathlon, which I guess is a competition that exists between multiple universities, and they'll be measuring the energy consumption in this house once it's completed to see how it compares to other concepts around the country. But we haven't gotten it built yet, but this is what it should look like when we're done. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Keep sliding through here, but this is the floor plan. It kind of gives you a quick snapshot of it's also a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. It's only 1,100 square feet, so it's small. The bedrooms are going to be small, but it does have those key, fundamental features. They did a projection here, on the affordability of it. These were projections that as we're getting into it, we can see that they're not necessarily where we're going to land, but all along I've given them the challenge. We've got to find a way to build housing that's more like the $100,000 price point rather than the $180,000 price point. And we know that we're going to have to make trade-offs to get to that point, but so the 2 big things that this one sacrifices, I guess, if you could look at it that way, is there's no attached garage and there's no basement. And so trying to, in one way, it might be also kind of like saying it's somewhat comparable to dare I say, a mobile home. It's space-wise, but it would be so much better in terms of, again, energy efficiency, affordability on an ongoing basis. And then I think there's also that element of whether you want to, it makes more sense in terms of community planning and development to have these types of houses to build. So one of the key strategies in this is to use an insulated panel type of construction. So I just included these to kind of give you a picture of what that is. They're using prefabricated panels that they're building in a workshop on campus, and they're bringing to assemble here in our town. That even the area kind of gives you a visualization of how the panels will fit together. So the plan had been that they would be doing this back in the spring, like in April, and obviously just public events prevented that from happening. But we've kind of just kept talking and said, we're still committed to doing the project. K-State's still committed to doing the project, and we'll kind of figure out what we can do. And so with that, they have been working with a smaller group of students over the summer in a workshop to build the panels. And this is kind of how we connected with Bike and Build for 2020. You know, I talked with Eric and said, you know, we can't host 25 or 30 people in this context, but maybe we can effectively work with 2 or 3 in a safe and productive way. And I'm also thankful that the culture of Bike and Build kind of accepts that kind of mentality of let's do what we can do. And so that has led to having 2 interns here working through the summer on various projects. We hope that if the timing will continue to work, that the beginning of August, we'll all work together with K-State and our group to actually do the build of these panels.
Before we get too far away from discussing the panels, I wanted to point out that we had a few different questions in the chat. So one of them was, so like, how does this like kind of partnership happen with K-State or with other people? Is it just kind of like random ideas around board table? How do you kind of develop those relationships? And then the second part of that is like, what is your big dream for like this K-State project? And how do you think like, what would be your biggest hope that we can do with the K-State Association?
Okay. How that came about is probably just staying curious. I don't know. I mean, I just went to campus and started meeting people, I guess. and I'm thankful that the right person was in the office the day I walked in and said, I think you should meet so-and-so. And well, it was Michael Gibson. So there's no particular formula to that, I guess, other than just stay curious in life and look for those kinds of opportunities. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what is your biggest hope for?
And the biggest hope is that if we can find a way that this can be replicated, and that we could make it something that we build over and over again, if not only here, but I've told those students before, if you find something that works here, you're going to find yourself on the accidental speaking circuit, because everyone will be wanting to do this, you know, around the state and probably beyond. So in fact, we applied for grant funding through the Kansas Housing Resources Corp, and used this house model as a part of our application as to what we would build. And we recently were approved for funding to build 4 more like this as low-income rental housing in St. John. So we've got 4 more that we'll build of this model. We have an open grant period for a different program that will make the pitch to build another 4 in other towns within our county. So with that, we'd have a portfolio of 9 houses and a base to be able to continue doing development if the demand continues to be seen here. And again, I think we will find a lot of other towns are interested in this. Again, if we can actually replicate this at the price point we've been talking about. As we're getting into this project, it's obvious that it's going to be hard to maintain that $100,000 goal. We may be able to make some adjustments in the future build after this initial K-State build. And maybe I should kind of clarify where we are in that process. So we put the brakes on back in August or in April, and it's just been this summer that we have gone ahead and contracted for elements of it. So K-State's building the panels, but we're part of this partnership is that we are responsible for the concrete, electrical, plumbing, HVAC are the big ones, and some finish work. Those are the responsibility of economic development to contract for those and pay for those. So as we've gotten those bids and started the work, not all those estimates from the architects are in line with what the actual bids are from contractors. So we'll learn a lot in this first one. We'll probably adjust, no doubt we will adjust in future builds, but there's part of the goal. I think there's probably going to be ways that we can consider trying to, well, so for example, we won't always have student labor that's able to help
Carolyn, actually, I have one more question before we wrap things up. So what, like with this sort of building technique, has Michael ever discussed anything with maybe building tiny houses, or is that something that you've seen done in rural areas at all? I know it's something that's pretty trendy. I think I actually have a build t-shirt that specifically says like I build tiny houses or something like that. So it's something that we've seen a lot. Have you seen that done anywhere in Kansas or anywhere else?
We have. There's been a couple of high schools that have done projects like that. One in particular sold their tiny house to Colorado near here. I think most people around here would say that's a very small niche, you know, and what we really need is the kind of housing that supports a family. That, you know, if you're climbing into a loft to go to bed, you know, there's a pretty small market that's going to find that something they want to do in the long term. So you know, these are small houses, but they're not tiny houses. I don't know. I mean, there's no doubt there's some attention given to them right now. I kind of say, you know, if you want to live in that size of place, you could just get an RV, but I don't know.
I think that's a very good point. I'm keeping time in mind here, so I don't know how many more slides you have to go through, but I think maybe we should talk about whatever else that we have coming up next.
No, that I'm glad to entertain questions. I will do that over this. I'm just going to say that, you know, going to give a nod to the project that Devin and Lizzie and Eliza, our Bike and Build BAPs, are working on right now. It's community development, but it also has an apartment in it. So it is kind of going to function a lot like our apartment here in economic development. So there's Devin and Eliza just a couple days ago, hard at it. One of the things Eric asked me to kind of address is, okay, so I've learned a little bit about what rural housing challenges are. What can I do? And here's some of my thoughts. What can you do? I think just like Bike and Build encourages year in and year out, spending some time learning the world from another point of view really has ongoing value. In fact, I can remember listening or having this conversation with one of the Bike and Build participants last summer as we were in a wheat field. We've tried to kind of incorporate an element of cultural exchange in all of our experiences with Bike and Build, and he was telling me that while he was in Germany, people would ask him what Americans think on such and such, and he came to realize America is kind of 4 or 5 different regions. It's not really something you can easily characterize. Americans are such and such way, and with that, I think that, you know, if you have an opportunity to participate in something like a Bike and Build cross-country route, I don't know if the VAP internship opportunity is going to be available on an ongoing basis, but I hope it's something that people would consider if it is. I think that those have, you learn something different by learning it directly and experiencing it through different eyes that I think carries with you into the activities you do for a lifetime. So there's a couple of thoughts. I think learning a skill that has a meaningful contribution is an act of service, whether you're applying that to housing. I mean, we kind of live in an environment now where a lot of people don't know how to do their own home maintenance. And so maybe just learning some of these skills that you can use in your own life. But if you want to be a volunteer for any other, whether it's Habitat for Humanity or what other organization there is, you actually know how to do stuff like Devin does, you really make a meaningful contribution in that way. And then another thought I have is support funding for an initiative, not just the big headline organizations, but one that you actually know locally and know what they're working on. I think about a lot of organizations, and they need things. Advocacy is one thing, but we wouldn't be able to do what we do if people just had an opinion about it. We actually need things done and built, and we need funding to do it. And so, and I know our organization isn't the only one that would be in that position. So, in fact, so I don't know if this is Devin's chance to plug that they are actually have been doing some successful fundraising in the last couple of weeks, and have a little bit of a gap to reach a goal. And if he's putting it in the chat box, excuse me, there may be a way that if someone were so inclined, they'd be able to support something here. This goes, am I talking over time?
You can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, we're so good.
So coming back to the idea, I guess this was kind of that idea of get outside your own bubble. This is a last year's Bike and Build group that we took to experience wheat harvest. And I'm going to sum up with the idea of your contributions matter. I actually saw the author of this book speak. It's been about 12 years ago, and it continues to be one of the few presentations I could tell you what said some years later. And the crux of it is there is a ripple effect to everything you do. And I'll just summarize really quickly how profound I think that can be sometimes. One of the stories in here relates to a single man who was a school teacher from Maine who fought in the Civil War and was in the Battle of Gettysburg in a situation where he should not have prevailed. He had few men, little ammunition, but a real fire in his belly. And his, really weak crew, I guess, prevailed against the Confederate army that was against them. It turned that, as you know, Battle of Gettysburg was kind of a turning point in the Civil War. And the case is made in this book that if the United States hadn't won the Civil War, we would be a kind of a gathering of several countries, more like Europe. And looking into the time of World War II, there would not have been a superpower like the United States to be able to get involved in that war and turn the tide, not only in Europe, but also in the Pacific. There would not have been another power with enough population or wealth to be able to prevail the way that we did in World War II. And that if that had not happened, we would not be in the kind of free society that we are now. So it was, if you think about that ripple effect, the school teacher from Maine, whose thumbprint continues in a very big and profound way to this day. So I don't know, I'm probably not summarizing it in the most exciting way, but I love that concept. Whether you buy into that particular story or not, I do love that concept of our contributions matter. They lead to new things. They have a ripple effect, and don't underestimate what one person's contribution can do. So I thought I would just give you one more snippet of how when somebody takes an action, it can lead to somebody else doing something good. I took a picture of this kid. This was last year. He was 10 years old, and this is taken on the 4th of July at about 5 o'clock in the morning when he was fixing breakfast for the Bike and Build group that came through last year. And so anyway, if Bike and Build hadn't been there, he wouldn't have been inspired to give his piece of service. And I think that concept, again, has application in many ways. So go out there, do something good, and thanks for listening. I'm glad to answer any other questions.
All right, I think that's really good to hear. One quick thing. I know one thing that was discussed at the end of our Bike and Build trip, when we were still dealing with the idea of donations being a portion of what our ride group was involved with. We actually had a large discussion about, the impact that can happen, and a lot of different people file for grants and do work. And what we ended up giving mostly to were groups that really just needed like a solid project done. So we helped with like a woman in Kentucky had recently, I think, undergone surgery, desperately needed a ramp in her house. So we funded that sort of thing. Instead of giving to, I think there was one that was about solar panels or something. When you look at the organization, they have billions of dollars that they have access to throughout different networks. And so being able to make those strong and quick impacts, I think, is very important. I think that's really cool. I'm very excited to be helping with everything the Grace Photo Studio does. It does have a housing component to it. So eventually there will be somebody that's there as an artist in residence, and they will be there kind of rent-free for the time that they're helping out and working. And it's a really, really great way that we're trying to impact the community with another way for people to interact with it not only being, like you said, those agricultural industries, but having an interest for area artists and things like that. So I wanted to say thanks to Carolyn for spending so much more time with us this evening. It's been great to hear about all the work and experience that you've done, even before I even knew what Stafford Eco was, as well as all the knowledge that we can draw from. I'm really excited that and I hope that everybody else in this call has enjoyed this experience. And you please feel free to donate to Bike and Build or Stafford Eco. In the chat box, I also put in a link that isn't one of our web pages, which you might be sure to. It's just a Facebook page for what's going on with Grace Photo Studio. If you're more interested about that, we kind of glossed over it. You can see more of the actual work we've done. So thank you again to Carolyn, and everybody else, thanks so much for attending tonight. We hope to see you in the next week. We're going to actually hear from Ethan Mascu, I think I'm saying that right, during our next session, and he will be discussing housing as a determinant of public health, which is a really, really interesting topic. So that's next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed it.